Could you start again? Sorry, I'm going to. Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. Brilliant to be back with you again for yes another week with another fantastic guest. The last time he was on the show, he was looking a bit younger actually, and so was I because it was 13 years ago, which is quite incredible. We, discovered recently we are one of the longest running podcasts, business podcasts in the world, which is very exciting. With the Business Elevation Show, and what we really care about is I care about today bringing you guests and talking about conversation that can really help you to become even more purpose driven, to develop your business and your work with heart, but also to utilize business to contribute to improving humanity and doing good in the world. And we've therefore got a subject today which is about persuasion, which has some really good connotations, and also, not sometimes persuasion is not used for good reasons at all. So we'll talk about that in the show today. But wherever you are in the world, please, what I would recommend is if you have the opportunity and you're sitting still somewhere quiet, maybe you can identify two or three golden nuggets from this that you can take away, that you can use to elevate whatever you're doing, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a business leader, or you're developing your career, wherever at whatever stage you're at, there'll be something from this conversation that you can take away and utilize, and it might make all the difference. We need people like you to step up today and do things in a different way, because otherwise, in the world, we're always going to get what we've got now, and the situation is quite challenging. But actually, we need to change. We're going to talk about today about persuading for good. My guest today is Paul du Toit, and Paul and I have known each other for a good many years. In fact, Paul was instrumental for me in terms of writing a book and getting my first published book, which he's actually holding up at the moment. Thank you. Called The Power to Get Things Done, whether you feel like it or not. And he actually read it for me, and he wrote a little quote that went into the book. However, where it started was Paul gave me a copy of his book when I first met him, one of his books, and he said, what I'd love to do is I'd love to have a copy of yours when you've written it, and that held me to account to get on with it. So I'm very grateful to Paul. In every area of life and leadership, the ability to persuade with integrity is really essential. And persuasion can actually be a force for good. It doesn't have to be used in a negative way. It can make all the difference between success and failure. Now, Paul du Toit is one of Africa's most respected speakers. He's a coach, he's an author, and his latest book is The Book of Persuasion. He's the first speaker on the African continent this century to be awarded the Certified Speaking Professional designation by the National Speakers Association in the USA, and that was back in 2008. He's a professional speaker, say from South Africa. He's been inducted into the South African Speakers Hall of Fame, and he's got some fantastic hobbies and interests as well. Some of those that we share in common. You're in for a real treat today, having Paul to listen to and learn from. He's spoken to tens and tens of thousands of people around the world, so it's a gift when you have this opportunity to hear somebody who's got true wisdom from many years of doing really good work and trying to make a difference at every turn. So a big welcome to my guest today, to Paul du Toit.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be here. And thank you for inviting me a second time.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'll have to try not to make it so long the next time. That's impressive. I bet it's the first time you've been on a podcast 13 with a 13-year gap, isn't it? I was like that long. Have you?
13 years ago, I didn't even know that what a podcast was. So I think you were the first.
Yeah. I keep on doing it. I don't know whether that's a strength of mine or a weakness. I'm not sure, but I do enjoy it. So Paul, it's great to have you on the show again. Tell us a little bit about how things are. I mean, you're in Johannesburg, right now. What's the vibe like, the environment, the feeling in South Africa right now?
Well, politically, it's very interesting. So I'm not going to go into that. I'd rather talk about the weather because we've just come out of winter here in the Southern Hemisphere. And this is around about the time that the rains start. But this year it was early. So we've had a few really good showers. And it's now warm weather. So we're walking around in shorts and slops and, getting ready to take a dip in the pool and what have you. So it's actually really nice. Whereas in the Northern Hemisphere, you're facing, an uncertain winter.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to Portugal tomorrow, and I've just the weather has been absolutely stunning for about 3 weeks, and there's a low front coming in with showers, so be a bit warmer than here, though, I should think. So one of the things is fascinating about you, and there's lots of fascinating things, but you've got lots of interests. So you love running. You also love playing music, and you're a musician. You have a carp pond of late, and you also love single malts and wine and things like that. And you've got a family. So tell me a little bit about what's going on in your life right now, and maybe some of those pursuits.
Yeah, well, the running has now stopped. I'm still walking the dogs and going to the gym and what have you, so I'm keeping fit. But I made a decision some time ago that when the body said that the running was getting a bit hectic, that I would not let my running in my 60s affect my walking in my 80s. So that was a very conscious decision. So I'm still keeping very active, loving the koi pond. It was a dream of mine for many years to get one installed, and I did it in July in 2023. So I love doing that. And I've got some really wonderful news that was under wraps until about 2 weeks ago. And that is that I'm finally, after no pressurizing, but I'm finally going to become a grandfather. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Hooray, that's fantastic. When's that going to happen?
Due 4th of April, so we'll see.
Yeah,
it's never bang on time, but we'll see what happens.
Congratulations! That's very, very exciting indeed. Very exciting indeed. So you've also you began your career actually in the theatre, I believe, and you've loved music, and then you moved into this sort of world of coaching and facilitating and speaking. Why did that transition happen? And how has it helped you with that creative start with the work you do around communication and persuasion?
Well, my dear mother and my father decided to put me into a Waldorf school to start my schooling. So it was a Rudolf Steiner school that focuses very much on personal creativity rather than learning rote. And I think that's really where it started. I had the privilege of attending the Drakensberg Boys Choir between the age of 12 and 14. That kind of spurred on the musical genes. And I was very lucky in as much as I was in the guy in the dormitory bed next to me had a guitar. So he taught me how to play the guitar. And in my early kind of days when I was starting out in a career, I actually earned a living playing guitar in restaurants and the occasional pub. So I did that for a few years before I really got going. So that's been, in a sense, my creative outlook. And I've always seen myself as a creative person. I've never had a real job. I've probably always been unemployable, and I'm now unemployable because of my age. So I'm just going to keep going on the same trajectory because it's what I love doing, and I just love the freedom. And what I have found, which is quite remarkable, is that I've now got 3 business books. And every time I've sat down and written a business book, I found it the most rewarding and enjoyable thing I've ever done. So I've decided to write a few more. I'm busy with one at the moment, which I don't really have a title for, but what it's about is the evolution of choice. So I'm in the process of writing about that and just loving the research, loving it.
That's great. They're interesting books because one of those things for me, I always struggle to get myself into the sort of mindset to get on and do it. But actually, when you do get into it, it can be, as you say, a very rewarding experience.
I become pretty immersed. I mean, I never get this writer's block thing. I just, I have to be stopped in a sense. There's this voice that comes from upstairs saying, "Dinner's on the table. Oh, I'll be there in 5 minutes," because I know, I can't keep that waiting because it's going to spoil the food. So eventually I close it down. But I don't like to be interrupted when I've got a train of thought going. I just find it really motivating.
Excellent. So what was the reason for this topic of persuasion right now? Why do you think it's important? There's there are like there's a famous Cialdini book on
Yeah.
persuasion. What made you decide that right now we need this book?
Well, I think for starters, I've never really been that good at it. I mean, I've been a reasonable salesman when I needed to be, but
Hmm.
I felt that I would like to personally acquire persuasion skills. So I got hold of a few books, started reading, and I really found the techniques and the keys and the tips and the tricks and what have you. I found them quite fascinating, and when I tried them out, well, they worked.
Yeah.
So what I felt as well is that as I was writing things, there's been a lot of developments in neuroscience. So certain passages in certain books became outdated as stuff was being revealed. So I wanted to write something that was firstly updated, but secondly, a really easy read for someone that doesn't want to plow through a 400 or a 300-page book. So it's just under 42,000 words with the summary of each of the 6 parts at the end. And I think it makes for a pretty easy read, and it gives people actionable things that they can do to increase their persuasive powers.
Yeah. So one thing that this show really cares about is doing good, actually. And I wonder, as as you've got you've matured. I certainly found as I kind of hit 50, my desires to actually contribute to the world in a really positive way
Yeah.
lifted. Has it been the same for you? And is persuasion, an important tool to enable us to do that?
Well, I feel that persuasion as a word gets a bit of a raw deal because it's often seen in a negative light. And um, the moment one offers a talk on persuasion, people automatically default into that being for salespeople.
Yeah.
Now, it's not that it's not for salespeople. It's a hugely valuable skill to learn if you're in sales, but it applies to anyone who communicates because communication is about persuasion. Just about every time you communicate with anyone, you are in effect communicating because you want to get your point of view across and you'd like them to listen to you. By the same token, one of the greatest persuasion skills is the ability to be able to listen in an engaged manner. Now, psychologists call that active listening. In the book, I prefer to call it engaged listening. When you say, if you're online or if you're in front of a person, that you make the eye contact and you show that you're really listening to what they have to say. It is one of the persuasion tools.
Yeah.
But I think really to answer your question, I think that we want to try and make the most out of our conversations. And if we have an opportunity to speak to somebody whom we didn't easily manage to get a meeting with, or just maybe a chance meeting in the passage, we want to make those conversations count. So putting in a persuasion skill here and there are plenty of them, there are over 50 in the book, can really be very, very valuable.
Yeah. So you mentioned there. The thing I'm kind of interested as well about this topic is, we sometimes see persuasion, as you say, has a bad press. It can be sales. It can be seen as manipulation. But it's, how important is it to also sort of link it with things like authenticity and trust?
Okay, so let me just go back. You mentioned the word manipulation.
Yeah.
So the two words manipulation and coercion, they've got a blurry boundary because coercion really is when you force somebody to do something. So if you look at some of the sweatshops that you've got in certain places in the world where they lure people over with the promise of a good job and they take their passports away and they end up in a sweatshop and they effectively become slaves. I mean, that's coercion.
Yeah.
Now, manipulation is where you, in a sense, trick people to do something by, it's maybe a milder form of coercion, but you're tricking people or you're getting them to do something that is not really something that they want to do. So it's against their will.
Yeah.
Now, my definition of persuasion, very simply, is that you are changing their minds and influencing their decisions with their permission. In other words, you're doing it in such a way that they agree that, okay, they're going to try this, or all right, that's not a bad idea. So they may change their minds later on, that's fine, but at least you're using persuasive skills. And the idea is to develop trust in the long term. Now, whether you're a manager or a salesperson, a manager with your team, you build trust in gradual steps. Trust doesn't happen immediately. By the same token, with a salesperson, if you want to win an account or you're an account manager, you want to develop trust gradually so that when you get the account, you actually keep the account and that you keep it safe from other predator key account managers that want to take your business away from you. But there's a very interesting thing psychologically about human beings, and that's that our default is we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt initially until they prove themselves to be untrustworthy. And that's where a lot of people get caught, is that they generally are brought up to be trusting. So persuasion is a little bit of a it's a topic where you want to make clear decisions about how you want to use persuasion, and start developing the various different skills, so that just like a huntsman has got a quiver with a whole lot of arrows in it, you can pick the arrow out that you need at any given time and then use that in a proactive way.
Yeah. Yes. So is persuasion, it can feel at times Machiavellian, but also a bit of a game. Is it possible to do persuasion and not be playing games, but do it in a very, very authentic manner?
Certainly, because if your motivation is that you've got the other person's interests at heart, then you're doing it in a very authentic way. But that doesn't mean that you are not allowed to have self-interest in the equation. Now, just for an example, anybody who is in a sales team, you are actually a proxy of the organization that you represent, because you don't manufacture the stuff, you don't package it, you don't do quality control, but you're promising your customers that the product does everything that you were told that it does. So you need to have a very strong belief, firstly, that the product does what it says it's going to do. Then you need to have a strong belief that it's going to serve the people that you're putting it forward to. And I often say in my presentation skills courses, and I run a lot of them, it's kind of the thing that I do, is that if you don't believe that the product that you're selling is the best in the marketplace, well, then go and find the one that is the best in the marketplace and go and work for them, because how can you be selling the second or third best product? You should be selling the product that is going to do what it says it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I don't think self-interest is a bad thing. Anybody in business is in business for self-interest, and they're pursuing making profits, and profits is not a bad thing. But one needs to have people's interests at heart. And generally what happens is the marketplace, if you're a con artist, the marketplace eventually finds out who you are, and all your persuasive deeds will eventually have been just for short-term gain.
Yeah. Yes. And some of the people, Paul, who will listen to this show, they may be, many people are, it's business and business focused. However, it can also be, charity, for example. And if you're working in a charity or a not-for-profit organization, you're still going to need to be able to persuade to access funds for, it's essential, isn't it? You've got to be able to put your cause across very, very carefully in a persuasive way. And I like that point you made earlier about, it's been a presence, actually. I would call it presence, when you're kind of in the room with somebody, when you're really there with them, listening with great intent.
Yes, you need to listen. You need to have the charisma to not only listen, but then to use words to put your point across in a compelling way. And one of the ways to do that is to just use words in an effective way. Words are a beautiful tool. Some of the research that I'm doing into the Choice book at the moment has revealed some quite interesting things, that the cognitive revolution is where we really started using language properly. And the path to us using complex language has been quite interesting. So around about the cognitive revolution, there was only 4 or maybe 5 of the six Homo populations left. And the Homo sapiens could already use complex language, the Neanderthals as well. Homo erectus and the Denisovans a little bit less so. But by the time we reached 40,000 years ago, all that was left was the Homo sapiens. And the reason why we have language is that we have this very interesting gene called the FOXP2 gene, which is only 2 amino acids different from a chimpanzee. Now, chimpanzees can't use complex language. They can use sounds and they certainly communicate, but not in a complex way like we do. So ultimately, one of your best tools, it's not the only tool, but one of your very best tools and probably the dominant tool for persuasion is the use of language.
Right. And do you, with that, so you mentioned there obviously about the Homo sapiens, etc., and having different language ability, but within the human race, we have a huge range of language capability from a huge spectrum. Some people maybe studied language and they've got more words in their vocabulary. Do we need to mirror and match our language to persuade people?
Yeah, well, I mean, mirroring is one of the techniques. It actually has an effect on the brain when you're mirroring somebody else, when you're sitting across the desk and your body language is mirroring theirs. With regard to different abilities in terms of language, that's really an environmental and an education issue. It's got a lot to do with the opportunities that we have. But the use of language is absolutely critical. And having said that, there are people that can achieve things with fairly simple language just because they've got the perseverance to be able to do it. So we're not entirely dependent on having sophisticated language. And in fact, one of the best ways to put a message across is to use very, very simple words. It doesn't matter whether it's English or any other language.
Yeah. And of course, sometimes we might find ourselves having conversation in different languages when it may not be our first language. So you immediately at a disadvantage if complex language is important. But
but I can give you a quick example that jumped to mind now about being able to persuade without using language or without using words. So I've been the head marshal at the Old Eds race that's run every August in Johannesburg. So I plant the marshals at various different points, and sometimes they've got to tell the runners to keep left because the cars are coming on the right-hand side and what have you. But of course, when there's a lot of runners, they just take up the entire road. So these marshals are shouting, keep to the left, keep to the left. So eventually I got out of my car because I patrol around to go and help them. And I said, okay, let me handle this. And I took 2 steps forward and I just made sweeping gestures with my hand, huge sweeping gestures. And like the Nile parting, all the runners just moved across to the right-hand side. So that shows, in a sense, that body language and the use of body language can be incredibly powerful and can be used to help you to mirror, to get somebody on the same wavelength as you.
Yeah. Have you got anybody who maybe is in the public eye, for example, that you really admire in terms of their ability to persuade well?
Well, if you look at oratory ability, and this is not about agreeing with any political views, although I am pretty much aligned here, but I think the way that Barack Obama used body language and the way he used his voice and the way he used his eye contact, he's very clever using of teleprompters. He would be a good example of someone that had a very smooth way of getting a message across and was very persuasive indeed. I think when the most dramatic thing was the way he actually got elected. He kind of came from nowhere and managed to beat out all the other Democratic nominations and finally became the president. I think initially he was up against McCain. And no matter what the negative things that were said against him, he kept his campaign positive, used social media very well, fantastic orator, and he got in.
Yeah. He was also someone who was hugely respected in other nations, actually, wasn't he?
Yes.
So he managed to communicate across the divide.
Yes, very much so. Very
Yeah,
much so.
yeah. So I would put him at the top of my examples as well. Actually, I think he had a very authentic way about him as well. Um,
Yes.
nice.
So in the book, I've actually selected 14 people that are regarded as being very charismatic.
Mm.
And there are some interesting things that kind of bind these people together. Generally speaking, they were people that really had to battle difficult childhoods. In becoming famous, um, they encountered incredible opposition. They all ended up being fantastic orators. And we're talking about people, not only Nelson Mandela, but people like Richard Branson, Greta Thunberg. I've even got Taylor Swift there.
Mm.
People like Mahatma Gandhi. So there's 14 of them, and Winston Churchill makes the list. I've avoided kind of current politicians because I wanted people in there whose legacy is kind of
Yeah.
almost tailed off. Greta and Taylor were probably exceptions in that way because they've already made an incredible mark. But it's this charisma, this ability to be able to communicate and to be able to connect with people on a very authentic level. And if you look, for instance, at Taylor Swift, there are a lot of the muso people are critical of the actual music, which incidentally, she's written all of it herself, which is amazing. What they don't realize is her incredible ability to connect with people on a very personal level and kind of, let everything hang out. I'm just a normal person. And that's what's different about her. And that's why she's got such charisma.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we're going to go to commercial break now. Be back with you after the commercial break, and we'll start to unpack some psychological principles around decision making and sort of around persuasion. Be interested to have a chat about maybe how we can craft our messages that really connect with people. That would be a great conversation. So we'll be back again with you in just a couple of minutes. So please do have a little reflect if you can over the break about what you may be taken from the conversation and what maybe applies to you. Maybe there's people where you could be, studying. I'd not thought about Taylor Swift as a great orator, but actually she has connected. She's got a massive audience around the globe, hasn't she? So interesting to think and learn from those people, whether they're like us or not. So we're back again with you in just a couple of minutes. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with Paul du Toit. Paul's in Johannesburg at the moment. I'm in the United Kingdom. So welcome to you wherever you are on the planet at the minute. And we're going to talk. We've been talking about persuasion and Paul's new book, the Book of Persuasion. And as you know, I'm particularly interested in how do we use these principles to do our work better, to make a difference, to connect with people. I think that's really important today. Show more humanity, and where we have the opportunity to do things in such a way that they improve the world rather than take away from it. So, Paul, can you maybe unpack some of the psychological principles that are really important when it comes to persuasion?
Yeah. So
How
I
people
think
make decisions?
one of the first ones is if you want to persuade other people, you need to be confident enough to think that you can change their minds. So the subtitle of the book is How You Can Change People's Minds and Influence Their Decisions While Building Trust.
Yeah.
So that was really the way that I positioned it. So when we approach somebody who may have a different point of view, possibly one of the best things to do is to firstly listen to their point of view and acknowledge it. So acknowledgement is it's a very powerful persuasion tool, because it shows the person, well, you are now prepared to engage their point of view first before putting forward your point of view. But now, if you then decide that you want to put forward a different point of view, we often think, well, hang on, no, how am I going to be able to persuade this person to change their mind? But let's look at how people make decisions and what they base their decisions on. And what we do is that we use our own terms of reference that may be in our minds. So we can only really use our past experiences and call on what we would normally have done, or how we would normally have responded in a similar situation, because our brain is taking shortcuts. Now, the reason our brain takes shortcuts is that when you wake up in the morning and your brain is all charged up, you've got a certain amount of finite energy in your brain. And to give you an idea, your brain consumes about 60 times what a cell phone, what an iPhone consumes. And if you've reached those evenings where you're absolutely shattered at about 7 o'clock in the evening, it's probably because you've been really concentrating and using a lot of cognitive effort in your brain. So what we do automatically, and it's not something that we consciously teach ourselves to do, but the brain is wired to take shortcuts. And we call those shortcuts heuristics. So the reason why we need to understand this is that we labor under the illusion that people kind of work out everything very carefully, and that before they don't. They're taking shortcuts. So there are different types of heuristics. One is a representative heuristic. So a short example would be, you see a snake, and if you're not really familiar with snakes, automatically you're scared because you think it's poisonous. That might just be a corn snake. It might not be poisonous at all. You could pick it up and handle it and it'll be fine. But the representative heuristic makes you fear the corn snake.
Yeah.
So there are various different types. There's one heuristic whereby you will automatically profile someone according to how they look. So if you have a huge guy walking down the street, and I'll use British measurements, let's say 6'8", and you say, oh, he must be a rugby lock forward, but he might be from Sweden. He's never heard of rugby and he prefers archery or chess. So that's another example of a heuristic where we just kind of take a shortcut and we assume that people are what we think they are. Another good example might be you go to a fancy restaurant, you get this beautiful leather-bound menu, and it's got like 15 pages in it, and you thought, okay, well, I feel like fish. So you go to the pesca and you look in there, and oh my goodness, there's 36 different choices of fish. You're not going to go through all 36. You just look at the top 6, and whichever one's closest to what you were looking for, you're going to choose that. That's called satisficing. It's a heuristic. We didn't come to a restaurant to now have to do a thesis or expend a whole lot of energy. We went there to relax. So you pick something and then inevitably when your partner's food comes, you look at them and you say, oh, yours looks nice, because then you regret what you ordered. But that's essentially how it works. So we need to realize that very often when people respond to things, I'm not saying it's always like this, but a lot of the time it's just a knee-jerk, quick response. So therefore, what we really need to do is, if that conversation counts, what we want to do is to prepare properly for that conversation. So we want to prepare what it is that what we're going to say. We need to practice how we're going to put it across, and maybe go through it a few times. And we need to also understand that there is no persuasion technique that is a silver bullet. It won't work every time. So the other characteristic is you've got to have perseverance. You've got to be able to persevere and maybe take it from a different angle. But you can certainly have a strategy when you move in and speak to people. So I'll give you an example of a personal story, something that happened to me a few years ago. So I was given a referral from a business colleague of mine, and I went to go and see this chap who was the CEO of a instruments company. And he I could see by the way the interview was going that he was fairly overbearing, but in a gentle way, and he always got his way. So he said to me, well, I'd like to invite you back in 3 days' time to come and talk to my management. Now, I could already pick up that it was kind of almost just a show, and a show of respect that he was calling them in, because he was going to make the decision anyway. So when I arrived there and I was introduced to the managers, so all 5 of us sat down, and at that point he said, would you like something to drink? Now, I just had water to drink in my car, but I said, yes, please, some water would be very nice. He then got up and went and fetched me a bottle of water and put it down in front of me. What I was doing is that I was training him to say yes. And then the next question, I got him to say yes. And then I got him to say yes again. And it was kind of a done deal. I ended up doing 2 interventions for them, and they were very happy with them. The point is, I had a strategy to get him to say yes. Now, that works pretty well if you've got driver type or expressive type personalities. It won't always work as well with a very analytical person. So in that case, you reverse it, because psychologically it's easier to say no than yes, because no is less risky.
Yeah.
So if you then had to say to them, well, is this a bad time to chat about this? And I say, no. And you say, okay, so I'm sure from what you described to me, you don't want to repeat of what happened last year. Oh, no. Okay, so based on what I've shown you, I'm not aware of anything that you came back to me with that is problematic. No. And then he said, okay, so is there anything stopping us from getting the contract signed now? No. So he said, no, you've got a deal, because you've dealt with a more analytical person. So the point is, we kind of walk in and we say, okay, we're going to have a meeting, and we've got no strategy, and we walk out empty-handed, and we wonder why. And then as we're driving our car out, the rep from the opposition drives in, and he goes and tidies up all the sales or the orders that you left on the table because you didn't have a strategy when you went in, because he knows something about persuasion. So if you're in sales, you obviously want to avoid that. But it's not only sales, it's management, and it's day-to-day situations when you are dealing with members of your family. For instance, your spouse. Generally, what you tend to find that happens is that couples have the same arguments about the same things over and over and over again, and they go along exactly the same route. Now, in psychology, they call that a racket. So what you can do is, if you can bring some persuasive skills to bear on that racket, you can change the trajectory of the conversation and possibly get it onto a more positive footing, so that you can get a productive result and not just go through the same old racket again.
Yeah. I like that. And also, I was just thinking back to what you were sharing around the sort of personality types, really. You mentioned about the analytical. Is with the analytical, and I might also self-use it with someone who's very operational with a lot of tasks to do, and sees the profiles maybe see the problems in things. You might use the negative language, like you don't want to see. Do you think? And the ones that are more optimistic, positive, perhaps you might use the positive. I'm just wondering how you establish the type, really, to
so
new approach.
I think one of the things that we need to understand is that a lot of our reaction is hardwired into us from the Stone Age. So what's happened is there's been a cognitive revolution, and the way our brains process language changed quite significantly between 50,000 and 70,000 years ago. But we still have the hardware between your ears is the same, is very much the same hardware that they had in the Stone Age. So if you looked at what our objectives were in those days, it was find food and water, find shelter, protect the family from danger, and above all, and this was a huge thing, nurture the children, because they're going to look after me when I'm old. Now, just remember, there was no currency in those days. So we lived by a law of familial reciprocity. So we would trade favors, and everyone had a role in the clan. And in those days, because clans were generally mobile, they operated on a very very mobile basis, where they could move from one place to the other, and everyone had their own role to do. So you had your own role according to your strengths, your age, what you could do. So, for instance, maybe the grandmother who'd be, maybe 42 years old, if she'd survived that long, her job would be to look after the children. The men would go out and hunt. The women would go and gather. And there'd be one crowd that if they were near the sea or near a lake, they'd go and so everyone kind of had their role. Now, it's interesting to note that the earliest records of using currency, like coins and stuff, to create a universal exchange mechanism was actually around about 650 to 625 BC. So prior to that, everything was swapped around and done via reciprocity. So we are hardwired to respond, to be risk averse. And one of the things that we are not familiar with is accumulation. And that's why most people don't really get it right to save a lot of money. So the people that have got it right, a very small percentage of the world's population, way under 1%, have got a huge amount of wealth. You've got a huge amount of people that are actually quite poor because the mindset is being loss averse. So if we understand that people are loss averse, we need to first quell their fears of what they're going to lose before you push them towards something that might potentially benefit them.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. In one of my sort of former careers, I was a sales person, a business development manager in confectionery firm Mars, and going through NLP training and things like that. What technique I found really helpful was to ask people, what was really important if I was looking for a contract with them, what's really important to them about the supply situation, and then I'd ask them, and then maybe come up with 4 or 5 things. I'd ask them to prioritize it, and had a couple of examples that I was really so pleased with, because I wrote proposals to them, and they both came back and said, I couldn't believe the proposal. It was like you got inside my head. Well, all I was doing was asking them and then writing, word for word what they said to me, and got in a prioritized order and fed it back to them.
Fabulous.
And that's
so there's a lovely technique that one can use, and that is the technique of asking permission. So when you're sitting down and let's say you're speaking to somebody for the first time and you've been invited in to talk about, let's say, a product, you might start off by asking them permission to ask some questions, and you say, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Now, by asking permission to ask questions, if you then ask a question, they can't turn around and say, I'm not telling you, or I'm not going to answer that, because they just gave you permission to ask a question.
Yeah.
But the trick is you don't do anything threatening initially. You just ask a few very background questions. How long has the company been around? And, you don't even go towards turnover. You say, hey, how many computer terminals have you got? And what is the head count of the people? A few basic questions. Then the next step is very important. You ask permission again to ask questions. And the reason for that is that now you want to go deep and you want to find out what the problem is. Because if you're trying to convince people to do something or to take on a product that you've got, you're not going to have much success unless you unveil what their problem is. And the likelihood of them acting is directly proportionate to the size of the problem. So the bigger the problem, the more likely they are to act. But once you've asked permission the second time, it's very difficult for them to not give you the information that you asked directly for, because they said you could ask, you were given permission. Yeah. So it's a very strong persuasive technique to use by asking permission.
Yes. Yes. You're taking me back to a military base in Hereford where sort of special forces were based. And going in there on a sales call and asking permission and being told no. I was, where are all the different catering? Can't tell you that. It was quite fun, because everything I asked for and every time I asked permission, I got a no. In the end, all I could say was, you probably could tell me, you'd have to kill me, wouldn't you? Afterwards.
But then again, that particular scenario involved rules that could not be broken.
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
that is a bit of, when you have a military hierarchy, you have a chain of command where essentially you're required to often do things that are against your moral code, because the officer above you told you to do that.
Yeah.
So it creates a huge responsibility on senior officers not to put people in a position that's going to go against their moral code. And in fact, talking about moral code, here's another interesting little bit about persuasion. There was a study done by a psychologist called Thomas Moriarty, where what the statistics showed that if you went to the beach and you put your stuff down and you lay and you got yourself a nice tan, and you now wanted to go for a swim, and while you were swimming, someone came and stole your stuff, the instances of people that would get up, people surrounding that would get up and approach the thief and say, you can actually put that stuff back because it's not yours, was apparently about 20%. The other 80% would just shrug and say, well, I'm not going to get into a thing. It's not my stuff. But if you went up to people about 10 or 12 meters away from you, you say, look, my wife and I just want to go for a quick dip. Would you mind just watching our stuff? And they said, yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
It goes up from 20% to 95%, that if someone goes and now meddles with their stuff, they'll get up and at risk to themselves demand that the person goes away or puts the stuff back.
Yeah.
Now, you've got to ask yourself why. And the reason very simply is that if I ask you to do something and you say, yes, I will do it, you've now made a commitment in your own mind. Yes. And once you've made a commitment in your own mind, if you were to not stop the thief, you would be breaking your own moral code. So now let's just move away from the beach and go to a restaurant. So you've got a restaurant, and you're finding that the people that book, there's about a 30% no-show rate, even despite the fact that the person that takes bookings says, if you change your mind or you can't make it, please just phone and let us know. So she changed what she said to the people just before she put down the phone, and she phrased it like this: if you can't make the booking for any reason this evening, will you please phone and let us know? The person would then say, yes, of course. And once they'd said yes, they'd made a commitment in their mind. And if they weren't going to pitch, they would quickly phone and let them know. The no-show rate dropped from 30 to 10%.
Yeah. So in that situation, you're creating, it's really a verbal contract between the two of you as well, aren't you?
Exactly. Now, let me take this a little bit further. I don't know if you are aware, but when you pick up a physical book and read it, you are likely to retain more and be able to repeat more from that book than if you were reading it online. And there's plenty of studies that have actually shown that. So one of the reasons why when you're concluding a deal, they get a signature on a piece of paper is that if people just have a gentleman's agreement or whatever it's called, and they say, yes, no, okay, we've got a deal. Please come and deliver that course for us in 2 weeks' time. These are the dates and what have you. And, we'll see you then. And then you pitch up there and they say, oh, no, we changed our mind and this, that, and the next thing. It's because you didn't get it in writing, mate. So if you get it in writing and you get them to sign. Now, with what we do, running presentation skills courses and what have you, it's quite tough to get people to sign. It's not a priority to them. And you've actually got to pester them to sign. But the moment they sign it doesn't matter that it's on paper. They make the signature makes a commitment in their own brain that now I can't cancel this.
Yes.
And every time we've had a contract, we have never had a cancellation.
That's really interesting. Makes
and
sense.
It's not because it's in writing. It's because they have. So writing things down or getting a contract signed is a very powerful persuasion technique because it effectively ties things up.
I think that, and also it's a way, isn't it, of seeing if people are really serious.
Yes, because at that particular point, particularly if you're there, now one of the biggest things is if you send it off and it's being shipped around, you're much more likely to get a no and they just don't sign the contract, other than if you are there with the contract and you place it in front of them, the contract that you printed out, and you ask them to sign. It's very difficult, if they said that they're going to do it, for them to say that they are now not going to do it, so they tend to sign. So it's better to be present, get the signature on the piece of paper. The moment they've signed it in their minds, They've now made a commitment, and the commitment will hold. Look, they might postpone the date, but they will go ahead.
Yeah. There's something about people writing testimonials for you as well, which can increase commitment. I don't know
Well,
what thoughts of that.
if I tell you how great my book is and how it's going to give you persuasion techniques and what have you, well, that's me trying to sell my book. But if you turn around and say, I've read Paul's book and it's just quite amazing, I now look on persuasion completely differently. And as the subtitle says, it's how you can change people's minds and influence their decisions, but very importantly, while building trust. Now, if that comes from you, it's 20 times more powerful than if it comes from me.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything else that's important here? Anything? Your book has got 50 tips in it to help people. More than. And there's obviously 14 kind of case studies on people who are you perceive as being great at communication. Is there anything else that we in there that is really important, do you think, or a favorite tip or tool that you could share?
Well, yeah, there's a lot, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of them now, but one little tip that stands out that people, I was brought up that when I asked for help or I said, well, what is the meaning of this? I got laughed at. So because I got laughed at, I stopped asking for help.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing you can do. The moment you ask somebody for help, you are engaging them and you are showing them that you respect them and you're increasing trust between the two of you. So asking for help is an immensely powerful thing because you then open the door for them to be able to ask you for help if they need assistance. So that is one. The other one is just quite simple and straightforward. It's just being kind to people, putting a smile on your face, being nice, being kind, giving a little bit of your time. One of the things that as a parent we often need to learn is we've become so busy these days that we don't often have enough time for our little kids, when they're toddlers and what have you. Especially if you're working from home. Now, if your child comes down the stairs and mommy, or daddy, I want to just, what you should actually do is stop what you're doing, give them attention, and you'll find that once you've answered the one or two things that they want, they're going to toddle off and do something else and you continue with what you're doing. But by shooing them away, you're actually creating a problem for yourself. So we need to possibly learn patience. We need to learn tolerance. And we need to learn to just, even though it interrupts our train of thought, just stop what you're doing, do something where you can pick up on it, and then attend to the person that needs you. It also just enhances the trust, enhances the love, shows that the relationship is very important to you. And after all, in the end, what is most important for all of us really is family. There can be nothing more important.
Yeah. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today and catching up. I can't believe it's been 13 years. So we'll have you back again a bit quicker next time. But it's been absolutely fascinating. You're a great guy. You're somebody I greatly admired in the years that I've known you, and you're a brilliant author. This is another great book, The Book of Persuasion. So I do recommend that people check that out. This is really important. We have to go through life, and we have moments where that are really important can make all the difference. And having some persuasion skills in your toolbox and working to evolve and master them, it's only going to move you forward faster and move your initiatives forward at a greater pace. And it can make a big difference with the family and the children. So Paul's going to be in April next year. He's going to be having to, well, it won't be April, but it might be another year or two. He's going to be trying to persuade a toddler, which will be fascinating. Yes. So we wish you all the very, very best with that.
Thank you.
Going to be moving everything up a bit higher in his house. But sincerely, I really very best to you and your family, and I hope that all works out beautifully. And it'd be lovely to talk to you again when you're a grandfather and hear how you're getting on with your persuasiveness techniques. Maybe you can write another book on how to persuade toddlers. Maybe that'll be a start of a series.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
So do check Paul's website out, Paul Dutoit. That's Paul DUTOIT.net. Go and check that out. Paul does amazing work around communication. He mentioned there lots and lots of workshops. He's and speeches and lots of content, and so do go and check that out. It's well worth doing that. And yeah, we'll be back again with you next week. And next week, actually, I'm away on a holiday. We're going to be repeating what I thought was a great episode. We had Molly Beddingfield and several of us who went to Tsavo in Kenya in June to visit her Global Angels, her amazing charity there. And we worked and we supported them and we helped them to attract funding and things like that. So we share some of the knowledge, insights, and wisdom from what was a fabulous and fascinating trip. So do join us next week for that, and wish you all well. And please go away, think about persuasion, and think about how you can. It's one or two of the techniques that Paul has shared that could be really, really helpful to you going forward to improve your effectiveness and your contribution. So take care. Oh, and the other thing is, do check this show out in Apple and Spotify. That's a great place to get it sort of regularly fed to you as well. And if you love the show, please do give us a little rating on there. It's always really appreciated. And if you've got any questions, comments, you can contact me at hello@chriscooper.com.